So I'd like to thank Matt for putting together this exciting meeting. I've really enjoyed my time here so far today. So with that, let's see if the button's not working yet. The green button, there we go. So what I was asked to talk about what the U.S. government is doing in this area. And I put the title on here, Quantum Information Science and Quantum Computing, and I'll explain in a minute why. And so I'm going to start out by looking at that federal perspective and giving you this federal perspective on quantum information science. And, this is how the U.S. government defines quantum information science. And clearly it sees it as a much broader field than just quantum computing, including sensing metrology, quantum communications, quantum simulations, quantum computing. But I'm going to talk about quantum information science here instead of quantum computing because this is how the U.S. government has tracked the field. I mean, it actually sees this as that quantum computing is one element of that field, and why we've had some specific programs that are focused, and I guess I messed with the word that, is hat there. This is how, what the federal government tracks. Nothing like putting a typo on a PowerPoint slide. We really don't track quantum computing per se. We track all of quantum information science. U.S. government has long had activities in this area. The first group goes all the way back to 2008. I actually was at the Office of Science and Technology Policy within the U.S. government when that group was set up and ran that out of OSTP from 2008 to the mid part of 2010. There was a new group charted in October of 2014, and they put out this report. There have also been numerous reports from the agencies in the last couple of years. And again, a lot of these, we work together, why their individual agency reports talking about their specific mission role. So one of the differences between the US and some of the other countries in the world is that we don't have a science, Department of Science or a Department of Science and Technology. Science and technology is embedded in the mission agencies. And so we have to coordinate across those, and this is typically done through the White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is part of the Executive Office of the President. And then they set up interagency working groups under the so-called National Science and Technology Council, of which this report comes out from under. I'm one of the 3 co-chairs of that group. The other co-chairs in the last administration were Steve Binkley. Steve has not since been replaced by Barb Helen now at DOE because Steve Binkley has moved up a couple positions, and Denise Caldwell at the National Science Foundation. But when we get together, all the agencies are present, so we talk about it. That document basically points out what we see as the issues, and some of these issues we've been aware of for a number of years, and I'm going to come back to them because I think they're beginning to be addressed. But basically, part of the issues that we have seen is what I will call institutional boundaries. And everybody looks at a university, and universities are set up with these nice silos, and the silos have no little gears in them, so they don't work together and ever mesh very well. Yes, they do set up institutes for this and that. If you ask how many institutes are at some universities you have an institute for every 5 or 6 professors. Why? Because they're a member of 4 or 5 different institutes, everything else. They really do not mesh. We are structured the same way we were basically 50 years ago. And the problem comes in is that in the US, the quantum physics community was quite healthy, quantum computer science less so, and quantum engineering has hardly just begun. But we're beginning to see that. We have spent a fair amount of time talking with universities about that, and broader programs are being put together. There's been other issues as well, and so we are trying to address these issues because we see these as crucial to moving forward in this area as we begin to see the early niche applications coming out of the field. And I'm going to say early niche applications. What's to me interesting, and I'm not a technologist, I'm a scientist, and so all of you out there who are business people and technologists, you look at me and you say, yeah, deer in the headlights. I'm the deer in the headlights. I remember in 2001, NIST actually had the first meeting where we brought in industry and asked them about this field. And one of the VPs at one of the big high-tech companies at that time told me, when asked, how do you monitor a field like this, is that you know it's going to have a revolutionary change in how things are done. And he says, look for the first niche application. Because this is when you can begin to see that the technology is going to start. So there's that report. In addition, OSDP had a forum where it brought 70 thought leaders from academia, industry, and national labs together. They basically confirmed what we had put largely in our report, and this was a meeting in October of 2016, just prior to the election. And so again, that was done. You know, you can look out and you can see where the investments are going, and there are investments all over the world. These are the estimates, of course, from that appear from a McKinsey report that went into The Economist. Total investments across the world and everything else, and you can see some very large investments. I think these investments say that everybody is investing. I think what's really remarkable is when you look at some of these investments per capita. I mean, the investments of Netherlands and Singapore, I mean, my God, these are small countries, and yet they're making very large investments. Canada, basically, per capita, Canada is spending much, much more than us, 4 to 5 times per person more than the US is. Now, should we be spending that much money? Don't know. Again, that's something I'm just pointing out the differences that occur around the world. I think the other thing that you can see is that industry has, in the last couple of years, decided to invest. You have the large technology companies, IBM, Microsoft, Google, and Intel, all have substantial quantum computing efforts. And I keep hearing rumors of 1 or 2 more that are going to do that. There are other large companies, including many of the defense companies. Again, sensors are a key component of this, and other high-tech companies that are investing. And then there are a bunch of smaller companies and increasing number of new venture capital companies coming online. So I put a bunch of them that are older, but there are all the venture capital companies that have appeared in the last couple years in the US. So I didn't list the numerous startups because I would have missed one of them. What's more interesting is that there are these venture capital funds, and of course the venture capitalists in the US from a number of places are investing, but there is a fair amount of activity going on to show that there is a general interest worldwide in this level of activity. You can also look at other things like patents, and you can see the increasingly large number of patents that are being put out into this area as well. And you can go look at where the patents are coming from. So this is US patents, and you can see the uptick in 2016. I haven't gone back and looked at the most recent year's data. I probably should. But you can see that that is going on. So there's a lot of activity going on. Why now? I think this is where the intellectual frontier is for scientific and technical opportunities. And I think it's scientific and technical. I don't think the science is over. I think the basic research, if you will look at the physicists and people like John Prescott, he will tell you just how much understanding black holes and QIS are intersecting and everything else. And this idea of perhaps doing relativistic geodesy using entangled quantum clocks over large networks and everything else, the science isn't over. In fact, some of the best science that will come down to testing and understanding what's beyond the standard model of physics will come out of technology developed in the QIS arena. But I think the reason that all of you are here is because you can begin to see the technology applications, whether it is a software application or it's the use of this for other purposes. And the issue of discovering new materials, creating new pharmaceuticals, and everything else have also great potential social benefit. So this is really at a major tipping point, and as a result, you're seeing much, much activity. Foreign competition is growing, and especially in a number of countries. And again, I already talked about Netherlands and Singapore per capita. They made very, very large investments. But a race is on. And I think this is a race that is a race not only because you can see the opportunities. I remember at the rollout of the EU meeting, there was one of the small companies pointed out that the transistor was not discovered just at Bell Labs, but also was discovered by Siemens in Germany. Except Siemens decided that the transistor was just a toy. And the comment was, we will not make the same mistake again twice. The key to future technologies is down the QIS realm. Why? Because on the physical side, you can't build it unless the laws of physics allow it. And as Feynman pointed out, quantum mechanics allows you to do things that you cannot do classically or semi-classically. So I think this is why it's happening. I think the race is on, and I think we have to do things. So what has the U.S. been doing? So currently, the U.S., if you will read that report, was in 2016 spending about $200 million per year in the broad open areas. Since then, DOE has actually established and initiated a formal program. Prior to 2016, it actually had no formal program. It did have some programs at some of its labs that were either funded by other agencies or were funded through what is called LDRD, which is internal money that they are allowed to pull off to do their own research. But they have initiated a large effort, and that has grown to about $30 to $40 million this year. So that's a substantial increase in the effort. I think this is a great thing because, again, within the United States, within the physical sciences, DOE is the largest funder of the physical sciences in the United States. NSF has broadened its program. It now crosses across math and physical sciences, computer science and engineering. And so it has a much broader program than it did. And DOD continues to fund. In the US, in fact, it was the Laboratory of Physical Science at DOD, and Charlie Tahani is here from there if you know him. Charlie, raise your hand back there. Charlie's back there in the corner. You can talk to him. They were the first to actually fund this area in the United States in a formal way, all the way back in 1994. And in fact, they were some of the earlier developers of this. And DOD continues through its core programs at the ALFOSR, ONR, and AR continue to do this. DARPA and IARPA, they've had very focused programs. DARPA and IARPA basically will typically fund an area or a problem for about 5 or 10 years. But they are clearly focused programs, and some of those programs have been focused on quantum computing. DARPA had a program back in 2000. I think IARPA has had a number of them, and they continue to put calls out there. In the US, not only is there an interest across the agencies that we figure out how we broaden our program to support the key things that you need, you being industry and the American public, as there begins to be a desire for uptake. Because again, part of our funding of universities is to produce the workforce that will come and work for you. Part of our things is to use our expertise and deep knowledge to also help transition thoughts and to get the technology out for you to further develop. We've been talking about how we would better interact in government, industry, and universities in the United States. We've talked about having consortiums and other things. If you have views on that, I'd love to talk to you. We've had a meeting just this past year at NIST where we talked about this, and we will probably have other meetings in the future. So these meetings continue to happen, and we're looking at how we're going to do that and do it in the best way that leverages the whole community. This is not about picking winners and losers. It's about supporting the broad community to allow things to come forward. So let's go back to these 5 impediments that were in that document. Institutional boundaries. Well, responses occurring by universities. If you will look, there are a number of universities that have set up new centers. These get announced now almost weekly. There are others that I am aware of that they are about ready to make announcements. I and one of my co-chairs, and in some cases both of the co-chairs, have traveled to a large number of universities in the US talking with deans and provosts about the needs to ensure that it was not just a physics program. And again, you learn things from this, but I think we're beginning to see that. The education, workforce training. People are beginning to put together programs. Again, several large companies have told us at these industrial forums that, look, we would love to have a 2 or 3 course, 4 course night program so we can send our systems engineers back so they can actually talk to the physicists. It's not that they don't have smart system engineers. The technology terms that we use as physicists doesn't relate to how they look at things. But we're beginning to see that kind of effort. Technology and knowledge transfer is occurring. Materials fabrication. There's been some responses as something that we probably need to do more of, because part of developing some of these systems is to provide, until one knows how to produce something and go into a manufacturing line, to provide the materials and fabrication capabilities for the one-offs that are essential for doing the research, to explore, to figure out how to take the next step. And we continue to talk about the level and stability of funding in the United States. So that is my kind of a view on that. I want to say a few things about QIS and NIST, because I come from NIST, and we've had a long effort in that. NIST, for many of you, we belong to a group of institutes around the world known as National Measurement Institutes, NMIs. We basically work with all of our counterparts across the world to ensure that any measurements made here correspond to the ones made in Europe or China or Japan or anything else. It's typically the NMIs of the world that get together and basically are the underlying support system for the Treaty of the Meter, which defines all your measurement units. So I mentioned that because that's where NIST lies. We basically have 2 major facilities, one in Boulder, Colorado, another in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Those are the 2 facilities there. And we do a lot of work. We're a very large organization. The so-called metrology laboratories, the NMI part of it, are the physical measurement laboratory, the material measurement laboratory, and they sound just like it is. The physical measurement laboratory, we basically realize all units like the meter, the volt, everything else. And I mention some of these because it goes into why we have QIS, but we also have good interactions with our information technology laboratory, where the IT piece of this will come back in. So we realize all these units, and what's going to go on in 2018 is nobody will know it mostly, but the Treaty of the Meter is getting redefined, and it's going to all be based upon physical constants. We're getting rid of the last artifacts. And in fact, when you look at those physical constants that are fixed, some of us will call this the quantum SI, and the reason it's the quantum SI is because this set and foundation for the metric system will be firm as long as the standard model of physics holds. Now, I know John Preskill is working to try to find out what the fundamental flaw is so he can understand how to combine it with gravity. But as long as the standard model holds, this will have a solid foundation, which was the original thought. Why has NIST been interested in QI? And I'll come back to a few things. One of the things that we do at NIST is we measure time. We provide time in the definition of the second for the US government. Today, we can measure the second better than 1 second in the age of the universe. And that's basically the power of a single qubit. And that's called an atomic clock. We've been manipulating atoms for clock purpose for more than 50 years. Moreover, the definition of the volt is based on the Josephson effect. John Martinez, who was here this morning, basically talked about that. John Martinez was at NIST for many years. And the Josephson effect basically is how we actually get voltage standards. 20 years ago, we basically did something that no NMI, if they'd had right minds, would have ever done, is we closed the so-called metrological triangle for electrical, that is V equals IR, by basically having a single electron transistor, a quantum Hall resistance standard, and these voltage standards. And we closed this at a part 10 to the 7th, looked at it and thought, my God, nobody in their right mind should ever do this. When we were back in the game. Single electron transistors, because they are the underlying things for doing electron quantum computing in things like phosphor-doped silicon or in other kinds of traps. And so we're back in the game. We think we know how to improve upon that. All this quantum stuff comes back to allow us to realize things better than we could realize them semi-classically or classically. And so we have long had a desire and interest in this kind of technology because it allows us to lead the world in demonstrating and realizing the units that are part of the metric system of which all of our measurements trace back to. So it's the infrastructure that allows us to compare things together. And so this is why NIST cares about it. It has had a long history in it. We've had 4 Nobel Prizes, almost all of them touch on this and the control systems and the other things for it. So we really care very deeply about it. You know, in some ways, Dave Wineland suggested spin squeezing for improved sensitive clocks back in 1992. He wrote a paper on this. That paper is quite remarkable. And in 1994, NIST held the first workshop solely focused on quantum information at NIST. It was held in August of 1994. In spring of that year, shortly after we had pulled this together, Peter Shor came out with this algorithm. And there were a lot of other people in the government who were then interested in this because of the potential of Shor's algorithm to break codes. We've had a formal program since 2000, and we have had a lot of activity. So we continue to invest in this area. We have programs in quantum transduction, in complex quantum systems where, again, by putting together a bunch of ring resonators together in the right way, you can make a light of one color go one edge around a router and another. And this is basically just quantum Hall type physics using photonics. We built and demonstrated small quantum systems. In fact, we helped produce what has been commercialized as the first chip-scale atomic clock. We've been working on chip-scale atomic magnetometers. And we have a fair amount of work on quantum materials and solid-state qubits as well. We actually already use this in one of our clocks. We use quantum logic for one of our optical clocks, and those optical clocks will become the standards probably in the mid part of the next decade as a redefinition of the second occurs under the Treaty of the Meter. We have used the inability to tell about 2 entangled particles that are separated outside a light cone to close the Bell states, but also to create a random number beacon in which you know at the moment that those numbers are produced that nobody could have known what they were. So they're truly random by the laws of physics. We see that all this technology, what you need to build a quantum computer, I need some of the same things. You're going to have detectors. Well, if you're detecting photons, the better sensitivity those detectors have, the better your computer will work. So we see a connection between all the components in QIS and quantum computing. We will never produce a quantum computer. We will probably build a very specialized quantum processor for doing things like entangling clocks. Very specialized, meets our needs. So that basically says a little about NIST. It says a little bit about the government. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have, and I thank you for your time.
Right over here?
Yes.
Is there any collaboration that happens between agencies of the United States government and other countries' governments?
So can I talk about collaboration between the US and other countries? So it's really interesting. We always talk about collaborating. We have formal agreements with the EU to work with them in this area. We've had formal agreements to work in broad areas. We enter in bilateral agreements with specific countries. We have agreements with Italy to help them develop new types of atomic clocks. We enter one-off agreements all the time with governments around the world. What do those really mean? Mainly, I would say in many cases, we spend our money, so the agreement will be, you fund that, we fund this, and we will put in a little money to allow back and forth interactions. So those interactions do occur. We collaborate widely in the space. Again, if you look at from my publication history, you will see that probably half the people I have written papers with, half the authors are foreigners. So that interaction goes across. Is it more formal and structured? The reality is, we've never quite figured out how to do that in a more formal, structured way. We tried. The problem is every government has a bureaucracy, including us. And when it comes down to the details of doing things in a more coordinated fashion, it becomes very, very hard because of specific laws, rules, regulations, and lawyers on both sides. And do you think that's a fair description of it, Jürgen? It's an interesting problem. Yes?
Could you describe the technology transfer process within the quantum technology that NIST has been developing with various stakeholders across the U.S. in terms of academic institutions as well as startups and other businesses? How does that work?
So we do technology transfer in many ways at NIST. A lot of the stuff we do is we actually have very diverse laboratories in which we have, I would say, in our basic research area, typically about 30 to 40% of the people sitting in those labs are foreigners. Typically about 60% are non-NIST employees. So we're already collaborating with academia, with foreign parties and everything else. And so the information just flows through the postdoc exchange. We do patent some things. And we often, when we do that, sometimes it's licensed, sometimes it's not. People exploit it that way. We enter creator agreements on specific trade-offs. Somebody will come to us and help us. In the case of something like the miniaturization of the atomic clock, there we work with DARPA. DARPA basically wanted to do this, and we worked with them to help demonstrate the key capabilities and then to allow a couple of manufacturers to actually build a prototype of which one of those was finally commercialized. So we do this in many, many ways of how we do the tech transfer. It is very, very varied. And there have been some spin-offs of key parts coming out of NIST. A postdoc leaves and goes and starts a company commercializing something that has happened. Okay, last question, I think.
Would you please comment on the quantum computing race versus China at the national level?
So, I think at the national level, both sides have a desire to actually have the technology. And I think a real race is on to see who's going to have this. This is the same race that's going on. I mean, China is a very large technology country. Its technology development is moving fast. And we're going to have a race here. And what I would say is let the best man win. Hopefully, what will likely happen is there'll be multiple winners across the globe. Hopefully, at least one or two of those companies in the United States. Thank you.